Wow, big brain history. Another emperor with family issues, a traumatic past, and the title the Great? Wow, you sure are a filthy hack! Yes. The story takes place in 1712, Berlin, Prussia, where King Wilhelm I just had a son he named Frederick II. Frederick became a music and language nerd, but his intolerant father forced him to pursue a career in kingsmanship and military strategy. How intolerant was Wilhelm I, though? Well, when Frederick was 18 years old, he decided to run away from home with his best friend Kate because his father wouldn't support his career in the liberal arts. Don't get too attached to Kate. He was heading towards England because his maternal grandfather, George I, was king. Wilhelm had him captured, punished him by locking him away in the city of Kustrin, and then Frederick was forced to witness the beheading of his best friend. I guess you can say Frederick really didn't think too far ahead. Anyhow, a few years go by, and Frederick continues to practice the arts in private while still being part of the military. His father was the bane of his existence throughout this entire time. But all that changed on May 31st, 1740, when Frederick the Great's father died and he inherited the throne. Then, literally months later, on October 29th, 1740, he declared an unprovoked war against the Austrian Empire for the region of Silesia upon the death of their emperor, Charles VI, thus beginning the War of Austrian Succession. Wow, you might be thinking, Frederick the Great sounds like a meanie and a warmonger. Well, you ignorant child, I'm about to teach you the importance of context. You want to know what Prussia looked like during this time? It looked like this. Yeah, it has more spaces in its territory than a British person has in their teeth. With an empire like this, transportation, defense, and communication become significantly more difficult, so Frederick had to move fast and expand his territory. So, next time, you should think before you open your fat mouth. Okay? Great. Frederick was quickly able to take hold of the province in just 7 weeks. He began capturing some forts in the region when a surprise attack from the Austrians pushed him back, thus beginning the first battle Frederick would command, the Battle of Malzwitz. He thought he was losing at first and decided to flee, but the second he escaped, Prussia won the battle. Throughout the years, many events happened. The French joined in. Progress was always being made in Frederick's favor. It was going great. Austria tried to attack the supply lines, engage in more battles, but at this point, nothing could stop Frederick. In December 1745, Frederick got his Christmas present from the Austrian government, the Treaty of Breslau, allowing Prussia to integrate Silesia into the empire. The next war Frederick would partake in would be the 7 Years' War that happened 11 years later. France pulled in Italy and joined Austria in the conflict. Like most European alliances in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was done to shift the balance of power in Europe. After all, with Prussia becoming more and more of a threat by the day, all of Central Europe could, and eventually did, become an unstable region. In response, Prussia allied with Great Britain and attacked Austria's ally, Saxony. Saxony was actually neutral in the war till Frederick the Great made sure they weren't. In the 29th of August, 1756, with a force of 154,000 men, they invaded. Remember, kids, if someone isn't doing what you want, make sure you bully them into submission, and you'll go far in life. Unfortunately, the region took quite a bit longer to conquer, and this was the first sign that the war was not going to be as easy as the War of Austrian Succession. While Prussia did pull off many tactical victories, they often came with huge casualties. Prussia had the empires of Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden all coming down on him, while he only had Britain and some small Germanic states in the Holy Roman Empire. Things were looking grim, but then suddenly, a miracle. The Russian Empress Elizabeth suddenly died, and the throne was left in the hands of Peter the Great. Peter the Third. You see, Peter the Third was what we historians call dumb. You'll see why in a minute. He used to hold the right to being a duke in a kingdom in the Holy Roman Empire. Then he inherited the right to the throne of Sweden, and then when he lost that, he gained inheritance to the Russian throne. He also sort of had a man crush on Frederick and wanted to be besties with him, so he dropped out of the war in 1762. The event was used as propaganda and dubbed the Miracle of the House of Brandenburg. Wow, all of this, and it only costed Tsar Peter III the war, his citizens' respect, the army's loyalty, his wife, and his life. But don't worry about Frederick. The new ruler, Peter's wife, Catherine the Great, actually met Frederick early in life and established some sort of connection with her. And later on, she would be an ally. Soon the rest of his enemies fell. Sweden dropped out, France lost to Britain, and Prussia fought Austria to a stalemate and went to the negotiation table. While the treaty effectively changed the borders back to what they were before the war, Frederick was able to hold on to Silesia. This gave him some respect among the German states and showed Europe that Prussia was a force to be reckoned with. Shows of power like these would one day convince these German states to form the German Empire. Despite how much of an absolute Chad Frederick sounds with all this war stuff, at his heart, he was still the nerd people never talk about because art is infinitely less cool than murdering your fellow man. He was a very talented flute player and composed over 100 musical pieces and 4 symphonies. Frederick created all of his art in French because cultural stereotypes even existed back then. French is a romantic language, and German sounds like you're going to murder every person around you. Now, let's talk about boring government stuff like reform and social progression. And while I have painted Frederick so far as a brilliant military strategist and nothing else, he truly was a great kill me ruler. He believed in many of the core principles of the philosophical resurgence known as the Enlightenment, which dealt with issues such as liberty, separation of church and state, religious tolerance, and opposition to absolute government. Frederick granted dozens of new rights for the Prussian citizens. He gave them the right to freedom of speech, religious tolerance, freedom of the press, and stopped book banning. The death sentence was even changed. It was legal still, but it required a warrant from the king himself. That's going pretty far for the time. Even farther than that was stopping the practice of torture for a punishment except for soldiers who deserted their posts. Geez, that's not hypocritical in any way. Finally, he allowed those from the lower class to hold several government positions rather than making it a noble-only club. However, Prussian citizens could only be ranked so high. As for structural reforms, he built grain houses to store wheat in case of famines, he prevented companies from imposing higher tariffs so that trade could flow more smoothly, and in 1751, he created a new trade company in order to connect to valuable sea routes into places like China. All of these reforms built up Prussia from a European backwaters to a modern nation state, and one day Prussia would go on to be one of the most powerful European states to ever exist. Unfortunately, even after all of Frederick the Great's successes, and after years of conflict and struggles, his empire still looked like Swiss cheese, and his ally, Catherine the Great, was looking pretty hungry for conflict. If Catherine went too far and went to war, he would have to provide Catherine with soldiers and money, and the last thing he wanted to do was keep a promise. So instead, he made the need for war unnecessary, and Frederick had the perfect scapegoat. Catherine put one of her former lovers on the Poland-Lithuanian throne, so he was gonna do whatever Russia wanted. So Frederick was like, hey, how about we make Poland-Lithuania not exist anymore? So the Ottoman Empire and Russia decided to take Poland's land. Now you might be laughing because Poland? Poland, that pathetic nation doesn't even have that much land. But remember, we're not talking about Poland. We're talking about Poland-Lithuania, one of the most powerful states at that time. And it was incredibly dangerous. So, taking advantage of the situation would allow to remove one of the most powerful states in Europe at that time. And so it was. Over the course of several years, they slowly ate up Poland's territory to the point where it just didn't exist anymore. This process took till 1795, almost 10 years after Frederick died. Oh, yeah, by the way, Frederick died. Frederick died in 1786 at the age of 74. Many mourned the death of this larger-than-life figure. Initially, however, his will was disobeyed, and his successor/nephew refused to bury him next to his dogs, but rather next to his father. That either says a lot about Frederick or a lot about his dad. He was transformed into a symbol of Russian pride for centuries, mostly as a romantic warrior. This was especially true for World War II, where Hitler used him as propaganda along other famous German heroes like Otto von Bismarck. Frederick II went on to be one of the most respected men in European history. Napoleon Bonaparte, after wrecking through Central Europe, went out of his way to visit Frederick's grave to pay his respects. In World War II, the Nazis were so afraid of his body getting damaged by the bombings that they relocated him to a salt mine on Hitler's command. And when the Americans found him, they protected his body till the war was over, rather than humiliating the Germans by destroying the grave or taking the body for himself. And most importantly of all, I like him. Please leave a comment telling me how I can improve my videos in the future. Thank you so much for watching.